The Silent Observers. Captain Sarah Chen stood at the observation deck of humanity's newest diplomatic vessel, the Meridian, watching the swirling colors of hyperspace fold around them. She had been a soldier for 15 years before becoming a diplomat, and the transition had been harder than any combat mission she had ever undertaken. Fighting was simple. You knew who your enemy was. You knew what victory looked like. But diplomacy in the Galactic Assembly was different. It was a battlefield where weapons were words, and the smallest mistake could doom your entire species. The Galactic Assembly had existed for over 40,000 years. It was a collection of 200 species, each more advanced than humanity in almost every measurable way. The Kethrans had mastered quantum computing when Earth was still in its medieval period. The Zorati had perfected interstellar travel while humans were just learning to sail across oceans. The Assembly controlled trade routes, territorial boundaries, and resources across 70% of the known galaxy. And humanity, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 50 years ago, was the newest and least respected member. Sarah had spent the last 3 years attending council sessions on Unity Station, the massive political heart of the Assembly. She had watched humanity's requests for better trade agreements get denied. She had seen proposals for mutual defense pacts laughed out of chambers. She had endured countless meetings where ambassadors from older species spoke over her, dismissed her concerns, and treated Earth like a backwater planet that should be grateful just to have a seat at the table. But Sarah Chen had not survived 15 years of military service by giving up easily. She had learned to watch, to listen, and to wait for opportunities that others missed. The Kethrans were the dominant military power in the Assembly. They were massive beings, standing nearly 4 meters tall, with crystalline exoskeletons that could deflect energy weapons. Their empire spanned 300 star systems, and their fleet was legendary. Supreme Commander Vorik, their military leader, had made it clear on multiple occasions that he considered humans to be primitives who had stumbled into space travel by accident. During one memorable council session, he had compared humanity's technological level to that of children playing with toys. The council chamber had erupted in laughter. Sarah had smiled politely and said nothing. She had learned that arguing with Vorik was pointless. He did not respect words. He respected power, and humanity did not have enough of it yet. The Zorati were different but equally dismissive. They were smaller, more graceful, with bioluminescent skin that changed colors based on their emotions. They prided themselves on being the intellectual leaders of the galaxy, the philosophers and scientists who had unlocked the deepest mysteries of the universe. Ambassador Thyra, their representative, treated Sarah with the same condescension a professor might show a struggling student. When Sarah had tried to warn the council about unusual energy signatures detected in the Outer Rim, signatures that suggested someone was testing powerful new weapons, Thyra had literally patted her on the head. The gesture had been captured by every news outlet in the galaxy. Sarah had become a symbol of human irrelevance. But Sarah was not alone. Scattered throughout the Assembly were others like her, individuals from species that had been overlooked, underestimated, or outright ignored. There was Marcus Webb, a human intelligence analyst who had been mapping political alliances for years. There was Rin, a Zorati scientist whose revolutionary theories had been rejected by her own people because she came from a lower caste. There was Krell, a Kethran engineer who had been dishonorably discharged for questioning outdated military protocols. And there was Zara, an information broker from the Vex Collective who traded in secrets that governments wanted buried. They called themselves the Network, and they met in places that official channels never monitored. Sarah had been building the network for 2 years, carefully recruiting individuals who shared a common frustration with the status quo. They communicated through encrypted channels that not even the Assembly's best code breakers could crack. They shared information that their governments would never acknowledge. And slowly, piece by piece, they had assembled a picture of the galaxy that terrified them. The Assembly was not as stable as it appeared. Old rivalries were heating up. Resource shortages were causing tension. And most importantly, the Kethran military was preparing for something big. Marcus had been the first to notice the pattern. Catherine supply ships were moving unusual amounts of raw materials toward the frontier zones, the lawless regions between major territories. Training exercises were becoming more frequent and more aggressive. Fleet movements suggested a large-scale mobilization, but there were no official announcements, no diplomatic warnings, nothing that would alert potential enemies. Sarah had spent months trying to get the Council to take the threat seriously. She had presented data, shown projections, and warned that ignoring these signs could lead to disaster. The response had been predictable. Vorik had called her paranoid. Thyra had suggested she was inventing problems to make humanity seem important. The Council had moved on to more pressing matters, like trade disputes over luxury goods. The Meridian shuddered slightly as it dropped out of hyperspace. Through the viewport, Sarah could see Unity Station, a structure so vast it had its own gravity field. Thousands of ships moved around it like insects around a hive. Sarah took a deep breath and straightened her uniform. Today was another council session, another opportunity to be dismissed and ignored. But that was fine. Being underestimated had advantages. While the council focused on her public failures, the network had been working in the shadows. They had infiltrated data systems, recruited informants, and positioned themselves to see things that official channels missed. And what they had seen in the last few weeks had changed everything. Rin had discovered something in classified Catherine research files. The energy signatures that Sarah had reported months ago were not just weapons tests. They were something far worse. Someone was building a gravity weapon, a device that could destabilize entire star systems. The technology was theoretical, something that most species believed was impossible to create. But the data did not lie. Someone was building it, and the construction site was in the frontier zones. Krell had confirmed it through his contacts in the Catherine military. A secret project, funded by elements within Vorik's command structure, hidden from even the Catherine government. The weapon was nearly complete, and once it was operational, whoever controlled it would have the power to hold the entire galaxy hostage. Sarah had presented this information to the Council 3 days ago. She had laid out the evidence, explained the implications, and begged them to act before it was too late. The response had been worse than dismissal. Vorik had accused her of espionage and threatened to have her expelled from the assembly. Thyra had called the evidence fabricated, claiming that humans were trying to start a war to gain relevance. The Council had voted to ignore the report and censure Sarah for spreading dangerous misinformation. She had left that session knowing that official channels had failed. The Assembly would not act, which meant the network would have to. That night, Sarah had sent a coded message to Marcus. The message was simple. It contained 3 words. Operation Silent Strike. Within hours, the network had activated protocols they had spent months preparing. Agents began moving into position. Equipment was loaded onto unmarked ships. Allies who owed favors were called upon. And on Earth, deep in a secure facility beneath the Rocky Mountains, a group of people who officially did not exist began preparing for a mission that could either save the galaxy or destroy humanity's place in it forever. Sarah knew the risks. If they succeeded, humanity would be seen as heroes who stopped a catastrophic threat. If they failed, Earth would be branded as aggressors who attacked a legitimate research facility. There would be no middle ground, no room for explanations. The Meridian docked at Unity Station, and Sarah made her way through the crowded corridors. Aliens of every shape and size moved past her, most not even glancing in her direction. She was just another human, another primitive species trying to play at galactic politics. She attended the morning council session, sat through another round of debates about trade regulations, and smiled politely when Thyra made another joke at humanity's expense. But her mind was elsewhere. 3,000 light-years away, in the darkness of the frontier zones, the network was about to make its move. Ships were converging on coordinates that officially did not exist. Specialists were reviewing plans they had practiced 100 times. And somewhere on Earth, people were holding their breath and praying that the species they had always been told to underestimate was about to prove everyone wrong. The edge of silence. The Ghost was not an impressive ship by galactic standards. It was small, barely large enough to hold a crew of 20. Its hull was patched and scarred from years of service. Its engines were outdated, slower than modern vessels by a significant margin. But the Ghost had one feature that made it invaluable. It could not be detected. Human engineers had spent decades studying stealth technology, learning from their own military history and adapting it for space warfare. The result was a ship that could slip past sensor grids designed by species who had been exploring space for millennia. The Ghost was not the only ship in the network's small fleet, but it was the most important. It carried the team that would either save the galaxy or doom humanity. Commander David Park sat in the captain's chair, reviewing the mission parameters for the 100th time. He was a career military officer, someone who had spent his entire adult life preparing for conflicts that everyone hoped would never come. He had trained special forces teams, planned tactical operations, and led missions in hostile territory. But nothing in his experience had prepared him for this. They were about to attack a facility owned by the most powerful military force in the galaxy, based on intelligence that official channels refused to believe, with a team that had no backup and no way to call for help if things went wrong. The stakes could not be higher. Failure would mean war. Success might mean the same thing. Beside him, Lieutenant Commander Arya Stone monitored the sensor displays. She was younger than Parks, only 32, but she had a gift for reading patterns in data that others missed. She had been recruited into the network because of a report she had written about Kethran fleet movements, a report that her superiors had buried because it contradicted official policy. Now she was using those same analytical skills to guide them through space that was supposedly empty. The frontier zones were dangerous for a reason. There were no established trade routes, no patrol ships, no rescue vessels. If something went wrong out here, you died alone in the dark. But that isolation also made it perfect for secret projects. The facility appeared on their screens as they approached. It did not look like much, just a collection of modules connected by docking tubes, orbiting a dead moon in a system with no habitable planets. There were no obvious defenses, no weapons platforms, no patrol ships. But area scans told a different story. The facility was generating enormous amounts of power, far more than simple research would require. There were shield generators hidden inside the structure, strong enough to withstand a direct assault from a battle cruiser. And deep in the center of the facility, there was something massive, something that was drawing power from 3 separate fusion reactors. The gravity weapon was real, and it was operational. Parks ordered the Ghost to hold position at the edge of the system. They could not get closer without risking detection. The plan had always been to rely on a smaller team for the actual infiltration. 6 people, specialists chosen for their unique skills. There was Elena Vasquez, an engineer who could hack almost any system given enough time. There was James Coe, a former Marine who specialized in zero-gravity combat. There was Dr. Priya Mehta, a physicist who understood the theoretical principles behind the gravity weapon better than almost anyone alive. There was Takeshi Yamamoto, a demolitions expert who could build or dismantle explosives with frightening precision. And there were 2 members of the network who were not human. Rin, the Zora-T scientist, and Krell, the Kethran engineer. Their presence was essential. They knew the facility's layout because they had helped design similar structures for their respective governments. The infiltration team loaded into a small shuttle, a vessel so basic it would not register as a threat on most sensor grids. They launched from the Ghost and began the slow approach to the facility. Parks watched them go, feeling the weight of command pressing down on him. He had sent people into danger before, but this felt different. These were not soldiers following orders. These were volunteers who believed in something bigger than themselves. If they failed, they would die knowing that their species would face consequences they could not imagine. The shuttle moved silently through space, using the dead moon's gravity to mask its approach. Inside, the team reviewed their assignments one final time. Elena would access the facility's computer systems and disable internal security. James would provide security and handle any hostile encounters. Priya would analyze the weapon and determine the best way to destroy it. Takashi would plant the charges that would ensure nothing remained. Rin and Krell would guide them through the facility and help them avoid detection. The plan was simple in theory. In practice, they all knew that everything could go wrong in 100 different ways. The shuttle docked at a maintenance airlock, one that according to Krell's information was rarely monitored. They entered the facility in complete silence, moving through corridors that were dimly lit and eerily quiet. The facility was mostly automated, with only a small crew of Kethran technicians and security personnel. But small was relative. Even a dozen trained Kethran warriors could wipe out the entire team if they were discovered. They moved deeper into the structure, following a path that Krell had memorized. The facility was massive on the inside, far larger than it appeared from orbit. There were laboratories filled with equipment that humanity would not develop for another century. There were living quarters designed for species that humans had never even heard of. And at the center of it all, behind layers of security that would have stopped any conventional infiltration attempt, was the gravity weapon. Priya stopped when she saw it, her breath catching in her throat. The device was beautiful in a terrible way, a sphere of exotic matter suspended in a magnetic field, connected to control systems that glowed with alien symbols. This was technology that could reshape reality itself, and someone had built it in secret with the intention of using it as a weapon. Elena went to work immediately, connecting her equipment to the facility's network. She had trained for this, practiced on simulated systems, but this was different. Kethran security protocols were notoriously difficult to crack, designed by minds that thought in ways human hackers did not. But Elena had an advantage. She had Rin working beside her, translating the alien code into something she could understand. Together, they began dismantling the security systems layer by layer. James stood guard at the door, his weapon ready, his enhanced hearing picking up every sound in the corridor beyond. Takashi examined the weapon itself, looking for structural weaknesses, points where carefully placed explosives could ensure complete destruction. And Priya ran calculations, determining exactly how much energy the weapon could generate and what would happen if it was activated. The answer terrified her. A fully charged gravity weapon could create a localized distortion in space-time. It could pull planets out of orbit, collapse stars, or tear open holes in reality that would swallow everything nearby. This was not just a weapon of war. It was a weapon of extinction. Whoever controlled it could hold entire civilizations hostage with the threat of total annihilation. No wonder someone had built it in secret. No government would openly develop something this dangerous. But that raised an even more frightening question. Who was behind this project? Vorik had the authority to fund secret research, but would he really risk everything on a weapon that could destroy the very empire he served? Or was there someone else, someone pulling strings behind the scenes, someone who wanted the power to reshape the galaxy according to their own vision? They worked for 2 hours, moving with careful precision. Elena disabled security cameras and locked down communication systems. Takashi planted charges at critical structural points, enough explosive power to vaporize the entire facility. James monitored the corridors, tracking the patrol patterns of Kethran guards. And Priya copied every piece of data she could access, downloading research files that would prove what the network had discovered. They were almost finished when everything went wrong. An alarm blared through the facility, a harsh sound that echoed off metal walls. Krell's translator indicated emergency protocols were activating. Someone had discovered the intrusion. James moved to the door, ready to hold off anyone who came through. Elena worked faster, trying to complete the security lockdown before they were cut off. Takashi armed the charges, setting the timer for 5 minutes. It was barely enough time to escape, but they had no choice. Kethran warriors poured into the corridor, their crystalline armor gleaming under emergency lights. James opened fire, his weapon designed to punch through shields that would stop conventional bullets. 3 warriors fell before the others found cover. The battle was brutal and fast. James was good, but he was one human against trained soldiers who had been fighting wars when Earth was still primitive. He took a hit to the shoulder, his armor absorbing most of the impact but not all of it. He fell back, bleeding, still firing. Krell stepped into the corridor, shouting something in the Kethran language. For a moment, the warriors hesitated, confused by seeing one of their own helping the intruders. That moment was all James needed. He threw a grenade, the explosion filling the corridor with smoke and fire. The team ran. They had 4 minutes left before the charges detonated. They moved through corridors that were now flooding with guards, fighting their way back toward the shuttle. Priya carried the data drives, protecting them with her life. Elena stayed close to Rin, helping the scientist navigate through chaos. Takashi provided covering fire, his weapons tearing through walls and equipment. And James, wounded and slowing down, refused to stop moving. They reached the shuttle with 90 seconds remaining. The facility was going into full lockdown, blast doors sealing, life support systems preparing for emergency separation. They launched from the airlock just as the timer hit 0. The explosion was spectacular. The charges Takashi had planted were powerful, but what really destroyed the facility was the weapon itself. The exotic matter containment failed, releasing energy that warped space around it. The facility folded in on itself, imploding into a point of light that briefly outshone the system's distant star. Then it was gone. The weapon was destroyed, along with everyone who had been inside. The shuttle made it back to the Ghost. Parks watched the detonation through his sensors, feeling relief and horror in equal measure. They had succeeded. The weapon was gone. But they had also killed dozens of people, many of whom probably had no idea what they were working on. This was war, even if no one had officially declared it yet. The Ghost jumped to hyperspace immediately, racing away from the frontier zones before anyone could track them. In the shuttle bay, the infiltration team sat in exhausted silence. James was receiving medical treatment for his wounds. Priya clutched the data drives, knowing that what they contained would either vindicate humanity or condemn them. And Rin and Krell exchanged glances, understanding that they had just committed treason against their own species. There was no going back now. The network had made its move, and the galaxy would soon learn that humanity was not as weak or as foolish as everyone believed.